Have you seen the Drew Barrymore interview with Brooke Shields? If not, it's definitely a good watch and I would recommend it. The link is below. There's something in there that they talked about that I think is really important, especially as we think about Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you so much for joining me. So often I talk about the importance of conversation. And for this year, 2023, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I have been sharing things to try to help engage in conversation, even if it's in our own mind and not with other people. But the idea being that really through conversation, it really does help reduce and ultimately really eradicate the shame that we are left holding often throughout our entire lives for what was done to us. And because as we speak about this, we recognize that we're not alone. We recognize that it's not our fault. It takes some time to believe that, but we begin to be open to that possibility. We recognize that our struggles are normal as a survivor. So there's a lot that having conversations can create and ultimately even heal for us. In this conversation, one of the things that Drew ended up bringing up to Brooke Shields was that when Me Too happened, she felt like, as she put it, she didn't have a dog in the race. Not because she hadn't experienced things, but because the way that she experienced it, the way that she thought about her experiences, made her believe that she did not fit with kind of the definition or the idea of being a victim. And she asked Brooke about her thoughts and experiences in that regard. And Brooke said that she didn't really know what it was and yet took culpability for it. That was her word. And talked about how as victims we shame ourselves. And of course, we absolutely do. And that's a big part of the long-term impact that we struggle with. But in this conversation, I thought it was such a beautiful and raw conversation. You could see that they were both emotional and that this was something that they had really held on to for a very long time and potentially may continue to hold on to for a very long time. But in that conversation, recognizing what really kind of stood out to me is that they both experienced things. They both did. And they didn't even go into any sort of detail about anything that they experienced. But they both experienced things related to sexual abuse and assault. And I think Brooke Shields was on there because she was talking about, I think, a documentary that she's apparently done recently. I have not seen it. So there might be another video about that one. But so they identified that while they had these experiences, because of how they minimized it, how they took responsibility for it, that they never really were able to fully believe that what they experienced was kind of on that level of calling it sexual abuse or assault. And that is something that we all can relate to as survivors. I've never known a survivor of childhood sexual trauma, or oftentimes even adult trauma, but especially childhood trauma, that when I first am speaking with them can fully accept that reality, that it was bad, that it was abuse or assault, that they had no responsibility in it, because that's part of how we cope. It's part of how we survive. But in that conversation, recognizing, and they had access to a lot of things, right? But yet they have held on to this idea as recent as the Me Too big movement, that their experiences didn't matter in that regard. They didn't fit with, even harassment was part of that, right? But seeing their own experiences as not rising to the level that they had a part, that they could be a part of the Me Too movement. And this is really impactful when we are going through our own experiences and evaluating our own experiences, comparing our experiences to other people's experiences, and minimizing what we've experienced. And we've talked about this before. This is a coping mechanism, right? So continuing all these years later, even with the Me Too movement, to minimize their own experiences because somehow they believe that their experience doesn't fit. It's not as bad as. And they didn't go into a whole lot of detail. There were other things that they kind of talked about, but this is just so relevant to the things that we hold on to individually and the things that do end up coming up when we have conversations. And you could see it as they were having this conversation, as they were looking at one another. And Drew was even sitting on the sofa, they were really engaged with one another. It wasn't just a question and answer. It was a conversation. It was connection. It was feeling. Ultimately, it was honoring their truth and their reality. And when we can do that, it doesn't have to be televised. When we can do that, we not only help people recognize that they're not alone, which is really important, really beneficial for people. It's why probably many of you follow me. But in that conversation, not only do they know that they're not alone, but they can see how holding on to that sense of responsibility that is not theirs has impacted them. How they've held on to the idea that the things that they experienced somehow didn't matter, or at least not matter nearly as much as it might for somebody else. And when we can have these conversations just about how we feel, what we've thought, the things that matter to us, it shifts. It shifts things within us. It shifts the types of conversations that other people are willing to have. Because if you sit one-on-one with somebody and you are willing to have a vulnerable conversation, they will take that experience with them, make it more likely that they will be willing to have a vulnerable conversation, that they'll be more likely to open up, maybe to you, maybe to somebody else. And truly, the more that we can talk about this, whatever this is, actually, I think this applies to almost everything that feels vulnerable. The more that we can talk about these types of things, how we feel, what we want, our experiences, the shame that we've held on to, we reduce the shame, we reduce the stigma. We feel more lightness and freedom in our interactions because there's less fear of being judged. And we all, you all, deserve to be able to feel that sense of freedom, because the shame that you held on to, the doubt that you've had about whether your experience matters, whether it rises to any particular level, that shame is not yours. There is nothing for you to be ashamed of. Never. You did nothing wrong. You didn't cause it. So these conversations, they may seem insignificant, particularly if you're just having a conversation with a friend. But I promise you they're not. Those conversations have an impact on you as you're speaking, and they have an impact on the person who is listening, who is witnessing your vulnerability. If you have seen the clips from that interview, you know that as you listen, there was something happening within you, right? Maybe it was bringing up your own stuff. Maybe you found yourself just thinking how much you admired them talking about this, or how helpful you thought it would be for them to be talking about this. And it is. And that feeling that you had is because you witnessed this. And it doesn't have to be somebody that is well known. It certainly doesn't have to be public. You have the ability to experience that within yourself, to potentially create that for other people when you have a conversation with somebody, just for that person that you're speaking to. It doesn't have to be anybody else. But you have the ability to make an impact as well. Your story matters. And whether you believe that your story rises to that level, whatever level that might be, it does. It matters, and you matter. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you seen it? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to do so and click the bell for notifications. And if you found this video helpful or interesting, maybe you want to share it, make sure to give it a thumbs up so other people can find it too. See you next time.